as Dr. Saurav has told you, Amit Sawant is going to take our session today, demo sessions. So he will be basically giving a demo on the virtualization and other aspects. So Mr. Amit Sawant is a senior architect, technical architect, has been working on the erstwhile IBM. IBM has been fragmented now, but he has been there for 15 plus years of experience. And so what I will do is I will hand over to Amit. Amit, I think he will start on a present mode. Start with a bit of talking about yourself and what we're going to cover today. Just to let you know that the student who are attending here today, they're basically consisting of three streams, primarily two streams. One is the MSc guys, and the second stream is they are MTech guys. So it's a combination of so your presentations and your narrations, articulations need to be a bit of customized to both. Hope that's okay. So over to Amit.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Sushant, for that introduction. So hope you all can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, sir. All right. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, hi. So my name is Amit Sawant. So Sushant gave a short introduction, right? So yes, I'm working with IBM from past 11 years. Overall, I have around 17 years of experience in the IT. Presently, I'm working as an architect, right? So Saurabh did speak to me a couple of weeks back. He requested to give a small introduction on virtualization followed by the demo. So what I've done here is, Sushant, I've prepared a deck which I'll walk through the team here, right? So this will cover the basics of virtualization, what are the benefits, and the type of what are hypervisors, the type of hypervisors, right? And then followed by a VMware vSphere, which is widely used in most of the IT companies currently, right? So I'll give a introduction to virtualization, and then after that I'll log into in one of the virtual environments, right, and show how it is configured, what are the resources that are configured on the virtual environment, and how it works basically. Yeah. So having said that, let's get started. So virtualization, right? So what is virtualization? So virtualization began in late 1960s, right? Where they had to divide the system resources logically, basically, on the mainframe computers. So this was actually invented by IBM in late 1960s. Followed by in 1999, VMware came up with their virtualization products called VMware Workstation, and then in 2001 they introduced a product called ESX, which we'll be talking very shortly now, right? So what is basically virtualization? It uses a software, right, to create an abstraction layer, basically with the underlying physical hardware. Okay, so it kinds of divides or breaks the physical hardware like CPU, the memory, the hard disk, the networking, right, into multiple virtual servers, right? So this is nothing but virtualization. So what are the benefits? So it reduces costs. How does it reduce costs, right? So today, if we have to purchase a physical server, it will cost around close to $1,000 to $3,000, somewhere between that. Yeah. It again depends on the make or the model, the make of that server, right? So virtualization is one of the key benefits of reducing that cost. So using one server, we can install the hypervisor on that server, and we can have hundreds of virtual servers running on that one server, right? So in that way, it reduces a lot of costs. Second is it minimizes or eliminates the downtime of that server. So there are many features in virtualization like live migrations. So we'll talk about this. What is migrations, right? Then the storage migrations, the fault tolerance, high availability, etc. So when you have a virtual server running, and if there is some problem with that ESXi host, right, on which it is running, so there are features where you can move that server from that host to another host, and the downtime will be very minimum. It will be in seconds, right? So compared to physical servers, where if that physical servers goes down, right, there'll be minimum of 30 to 40 minutes of downtime. It again depends on what type of issues that are running on that server, right? So compared to physical server, the virtual server downtime will be very less. Third benefit is the faster provisioning of the servers. So in a virtual environment, you can create images, you can create templates, and if you have to spin up a virtual machine, you have to just right click and say create a new virtual server, right? So it will hardly take some 10 to 15 minutes for one server to come up. Whereas in a traditional physical server, right, if you have to install a physical server, we all know how much time it takes. It takes minimum 1 hour. And again, it depends on the applications that you have to install. So it goes on, right? So it will take more than an hour. So the third benefit here is faster provisioning of the service. Fourth benefit is you can run multiple operating systems on that one physical server, right? So you can deploy, you can create images, you can create templates on that one server, and you can have multiple servers running. The fifth point is you can have multiple flavors of different operating system running on that one physical server, right? So you can have 10 Linux servers, you can have 20 Windows servers running on one physical ESXi host. Whereas the traditional operating system, traditional hardware, right, you can have only one operating system running on one server. That's the fifth benefit. Sixth benefit is, again, the virtual servers that are running on that one ESXi host that shares the hardware, the underlying hardware of that physical server, right? But again, in the traditional physical server, you can have just one operating system. Even if it is a very high-end server, you can utilize all of the resources only for that one operating system. Yeah. So these are the key benefits. Of course, there are many other, but these are the key benefits of having a virtual environment or infrastructure. This is an architecture, right? So if you can see on the left-hand side, this is a traditional architecture. So the benefits that we spoke about. So you can have the underlying hardware. On top of that, we can have one operating system running. And on top of that, we can have one application running. So even if you have spent thousands of dollars purchasing one hardware, you can have only one operating system running at one point of time, right? But whereas in virtual architecture, if you can see on the right-hand side, that hardware layer is abstracted into a virtual layer, right? And on top of that, we can have multiple operating systems in the form of virtual machines running on that one physical host. Team, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So what are hypervisors, right? So we spoke about virtualization. Now, without hypervisors, virtualization does not make any sense, right? So hypervisors are nothing but basically kind of an operating system, okay? It's kind of a software which is installed on the physical server, and then on top of that, the virtual machines are configured, okay? So If you can see here, before hypervisors, we had the traditional architecture of the server, right? And after the hypervisors were introduced, then we started installing hypervisors on that physical layer, and then on top of that, the virtual servers were configured or installed, right? So hypervisors are very important in a virtual environment. So there are two types of hypervisors basically, type 1 and type 2. So what is type 1 hypervisor? So this is a hypervisor which is installed directly on a physical server. So we purchase a physical box, right, or physical server. There's an ISO which we have to download from VMware. Let's talk about VMware. So there's ISO which we can download from the VMware website, right? Make it a bootable USB. Then you can insert that, and using that USB, you can install a hypervisor software. That is nothing but the ESXi, which we'll talk more about that in the coming slides, right? And type 2 hypervisor is you purchase a physical server, you install an operating system, maybe a Linux or Windows, and on top of that, you install a hypervisor, right? So in VMware, it is called VMware Workstations. So this is typically used in a small environment where you have very less servers that you have to, install. But in environment like where you have thousands of servers running, type 1 hypervisors are used. Okay. So this is an example of the two types of hypervisors. So on the left, you can see which where you run thousands of servers, right? So we have the host hardware, the underlying hardware. On top of that, we install the type 1 hypervisor, and on top of that, we run the virtual machines. And on the right hand side, you see that's the type 2 hypervisor. So we have the hardware layer. On top of that, we install either Linux or Windows operating system, and on that we install the hypervisors, right? So VMware vSphere. So what is VMware vSphere, right? So it's a software basically. It's a software that has a lot of components within it. So it's same like Microsoft Office. So we get a pack of Microsoft Office, right? So within that, we have different softwares like MS Office, MS Excel, MS Access, MS PowerPoint, right? So it's same like MS Office. So vSphere is also a software suite, right, where we have different components of VMware, like vCenter, we have ESXi, we have vSphere client, and so on. So all of this actually is called a vSphere, VMware vSphere product. Yeah, so these are the different components of vSphere. So ESXi, I've used this word many times, right, in the previous slides. So what is ESXi basically? So ESX stands for Elastic Sky X and Eyes Integrated. Okay, so that is the type 1 hypervisor, right? So I just told a few minutes back, if you remember, that there's an ISO which we download from the VMware website, right? So it's nothing but this is the ISO. It's a ESXi operating system. So it's a very lightweight operating system compared to Windows or Linux, right? And the installation is also pretty straightforward. When we boot up with the ISO, there are a few information that we have to put in. For example, IP addresses. It will ask for the DNS name. It will ask for DHCP. So once that is configured, you click on next, and you're done with the installation. And you can access that ESXi host using the IP that is configured, that you have configured during the installation process, right? So we just take that IP address, browse it in a browser, and you will get a screen asking for the user ID and password. So that is one important component of vSphere. Second is the vCenter server. So this is a centralized management platform, right, to manage the virtual machine and the ESXi hosts. So in an environment where you have hundreds of ESXi hosts installed and running, it's very difficult for us, or it's very difficult for a system admin uh, to log into each and every ESXi host using the IP, right? So you cannot have hundreds of browsers on your screen for those many ESXi servers running. So vCenter server is a centralized a component where when you install it, you can actually see all those hundreds of ESXi servers running in that virtual environment, right? So this is very important. This is a second very important component of vSphere. The third is a vSphere update manager. So this is kind of a package which will help to keep the virtual environment up to date. So basically, whenever there are updates or patches released by VMware, this particular component will make sure that it downloads all those patches from a centralized website from VMware, and then it installs on all the ESXi hosts that is running in the virtual environment. Yeah. The fourth is the vSphere web client. So what is this vSphere web client? So when you install an ESXi server for the very first time, you can browse that server, the ESXi server, using the vSphere web client, right? So this is a web-based tool, basically. It's not a tool, but web. When you install this, it will give you a web-based application. The fifth is the vSphere client. So this is a GUI mode, actually, right? So you can interact. You can install this locally on your machine or the computer, and this will give you a graphical interface, and you can manage all the day-to-day activities from the vSphere client, right? So these are the 5 important components of vSphere. Sorry, was there any question? Okay. So there are 3 vSphere editions. The first is standard, the second is enterprise, and the third is enterprise plus. So these are nothing but basically the licenses that are that we require whenever you purchase these editions, right? So each has their own features, right? So the enterprise plus will give you all the features that VMware has in that suite, right? So majority of the companies, IT companies, they use either enterprise or enterprise plus. Okay, moving on. So virtual machine. So what is a virtual machine? So when we install a hypervisor, right, which is nothing but the ESXi host on the hardware, then once it is installed and configured, we start creating virtual machines. Okay, so what is a virtual machine? So it's basically a kind of a server that is installed, which will use all the resources that the underlying hardware has, right? So you can have multiple virtual machines installed, and the underlying hardware kinds of allocates. For example, if we have 1 TB of memory running on that server, right? So you can allocate 1 GB or 2 GB of virtual of memory to that virtual machine, right? Similarly, we can allocate 1 or 2 CPUs. Again, the hard disk will be allocated or configured, right? 50 GB, 100 GB. So that's how a virtual machine is created in an environment. So it consists of VRAM. So whenever we create a virtual machine in a virtual environment, we call it as VRAM. So V is nothing but virtual, right? So then the vCPUs, we also create, in the networking environment, we create VLANs, right? Where we provide the IP addresses, and then the disks that are configured. So again, that is called as vDisk. So this is nothing but a virtual machine. So all of these will be configured when we create a virtual machine. I'll quickly show you how we do that, right, in a virtual environment. Yeah, that's it. So this was on a very high level, right? What is virtualization, the benefits, the hypervisors, and the type of hypervisors, and what is a virtual machine. So any questions here?
Yeah, one query. So, when we are installing, like, we install VirtualBox, right? So, VM, on the system, on the normal system. So, are we creating any, like, are we creating hypervisor? Which hypervisor it is, like type 1 or type 2?
Sorry, I did not get your question. Can you
Yeah,
repeat?
so, if we install the VirtualBox on our normal system, right? So, it is also one VM kind of thing. So, so it is utilizing the hypervisor 1 or 2. It is creating the hypervisor.
Yeah, so it depends, right? So as I said, so if it is a small environment, if you have a small office which you hardly have to have 20 to 25 servers running. So what you can do is you can install a type 2 hypervisor running on one of the Windows or Linux operating system, right? And that type 2 hypervisor is called as VMware Workstations. So on top of that, you'll be installing the virtual machines. But in an environment where you have thousands of operating systems running, for example, let's take a bank, right? ICICI Bank, they have so many branches, they'll have so many servers running. So in that case, you have to have type 1 hypervisor, where you can utilize all the benefits and the performance from the underlying hardware, right? So it all depends from situation to situation. I hope that answered your question, Sachin.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Before I log
Sir,
into...
can you Sir, can you explain a little more about the working of these two types of hypervisors? Like, what is the benefit of in terms of working? How do they utilize the underlying hardware?
Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay. So the major difference here you see is we have in type 2 hypervisor, we have one operating system running already between the hypervisor and your underlying hardware, right? So when you install this operating system in between, it will obviously consume few of the resources, right? And to run an hypervisor on top of an operating system, the configuration that you have to have is more, right? So when I say configuration, you should have more memory allocated to this operating system, right? You should have at least 10 to 12 GB of memory, right? You should have at least 3 to 4 processes for this operating system, and minimum of 100 to 200 GB of hard disk. Okay. Now, when you configure that those resources, it has already utilized some of the resources from your hardware, correct? So when you install an hypervisor on top of this operating system, you have to again allocate the memory, CPU, the hard disk, the capacity, basically, right? So these two components here are already utilizing half of your resources from the hardware, right? So on top of this, you will be installing virtual machines, correct? So it's kind of, half of the resources are already utilized by these two, and only half is allocated, left to allocate to your virtual environment. But in type 1 hypervisor, that is not the case. So this particular layer is absolute, right? So it is taken out here. So you configure only the CPU, RAM, and the capacity which is required, which is minimum, right? And Then you on top of that install a virtual machines. So you have more resources here to allocate to these virtual machines compared to type 2. Okay, only because of this host operating system running in between. You got my point?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so is this something like in this the type 1 hypervisor we are directly installing the AXI host, but in the type 2 we are having like V squared the kind of thing, and it is dividing the multiple EXI host, and then it is doing right.
No. So ESXi host comes in both the situation, right? But the only difference here is this particular host OS.
Yeah, understood.
Okay. Yeah. So hypervisor is nothing but your ESXi host. Okay.
Yeah.
In both the hypervisors. But the only difference here that it has to, in type 2, it will be on one of the host OS. It could be Linux or Windows. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions, team? Okay, let me connect to one of the environments. Give me a few minutes. Sorry, it's taking a while to connect. Give me a minute more. Sorry about that.
Okay, so meanwhile, just one query, like, so vSphere is providing any like free trial of thing or?
Yes. So you can download the ISO where you can install the ESXi host, right? So that's free. You can download it straight from the VMware website, and you can download vCenter as well, the vCenter server, where you can centrally manage your virtual infrastructure, right? You can download that as well. I think you have an evaluation copy of 30 days, but in that you cannot have all the features. For example, vMotion, then high availability, then there is something called as DRS. So there are a lot of features within VMware, but I think that evaluation copy does not have those features. But you can download in your home PC, and you can test it out.
Okay.
Sorry, it is still taking time to connect. Apologies. Okay, so VMware came up with this in 1999, right? The very first product of virtualization called VMware Workstation. Then in 2001, they introduced ESX host, right? But now you see there are many vendors coming up with their own virtualization products. For example, we have Microsoft, where they have the product called Azure, right? Then AWS, Amazon, they have their own virtualization environment. then it's all based on cloud, right? So, but they have their own virtualized environment running at the backend. So in Microsoft, same like VMware, there's something called Hyper-V, right, which is running in their own cloud environment. So similarly, Google has come up. They have come up with their own virtual products, right? But VMware was the one which introduced these features. Okay, I've now connected. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay. So we spoke about ESXi, right? So ESXi is nothing but, if you can see here, these are the hosts. So we have multiple servers, right? So basically, a server is bought, right? And then we install the ESXi host using the ISO. And once it is installed, it will show you something like this. So these are the hosts that are installed, up and running, right? And on top of that, we have the virtual machines. So these, if you can see here, all of these small boxes here, 3 boxes. So these are the virtual machines, right? So a green arrow indicates that this virtual machine is up and running, powered on basically. The one, if you can see here with blue, this indicates that this has been powered off. If you can see here, this server. So this has been powered off. So basically what happens here is, so now I'm connected using a vCenter, right? So once we install the ESXi host, then I'll install the vCenter appliance. So this is again a ISO that has to be downloaded from VMware website. Once you install it, it will ask you for the ID password. And once you're logged in, you'll see this screen. Okay. So here you'll see multiple data centers. So basically, once you log in, when you log in to the very first time to your virtual environment, this will be all blank. You'll not see anything here. You'll just see this screen, which is on the right. Okay. So first we have to create a cluster. Create a data center, and then under that data center we create clusters. Okay, so clusters, I hope you guys on a very high level know what a cluster is, right? So cluster is nothing but combination of one or more servers, right? So we create cluster just for high availability, right? Redundancy, fault tolerance, right? So I hope you guys are all familiar with these terminologies, right? What a high availability is, what is redundancy, fault tolerance, right? So basically, first we have to create a data center, then create a cluster. We add the hosts, basically the ESXi host in that cluster, and then we start creating the virtual machines. Okay, so on a very high level, this is how a virtual infrastructure looks like. So when you create the very first ESXi host, you'll not have anything in there, right? So we have to configure the storage, we have to configure the networking, right? We have to configure the memory, the processors, a lot of things that has to be done before we start installing the virtual machines. Okay, so let's assume that I have installed this very first ESXi host. So what I'll do is I'll click on this host, then go to configuration. Okay, so this is where I'll see. So here, if you see, right, so memory. So this is showing the memory which is running on that server. Okay, that the underlying hardware. Okay, which has been purchased. Okay, this is not.
Also is a process जहाँ पे you are talking of 2-3 different systems और वो मिलके काम करने वाले हैं. You work on that. I think Amit is back now. So over to Amit.
Okay, sir.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sushant. So sorry about that